Good day, ladies and gentlemen. A warm welcome to another technical summary video presented by me, Letty Janse van Vuren. Our topic for today is the summary of the General Laws Amendment Act. It was a document that was issued by SAICA in January this year, and it's a very handy summary on the GLAA on whichever sections that became effective on the 31st of December 2022. So it's already in effect now, and it's very important. Right, why is it important? We're going to look at why it's important. We're going to look at an introduction, a short contents of the publication. I'm going to go into an overview and summary of the different topics in there, right, all the different acts that have changed, and then I'll conclude. So for the next 15 minutes, these are the abbreviations that I'll be referring to: SAICA, GLAA, which is the General Laws Amendment Act, also known as the AML Act, the Anti-Money Laundering Act, right? Because the General Laws Amendment Act contains all the sections that refer to anti-money laundering measures in South Africa. There's special reference to NPO and FIC and FICA, and then an accountable institution, and then our good old international friend FATF, which is the Financial Action Task Force. So in a nutshell, why is it important? Well, we know that FICA is another piece of legislation that we've got to comply with, and the GLAA is another piece. Also, all of these acts comprise pieces of legislation that your clients have to comply with, and if they don't, you've got to then report on their non-compliance with laws and regulations, which means that you've got certain reporting obligations. If you're in your capacity as auditor, it might mean reporting a reportable irregularity to IRBA. If you are performing a review, an independent review, you might need to then report on that to as an RI to SAICA. But also in your capacity nowadays as an accountant, you might be regarded yourself as an accountable institution, and then you've got certain requirements in terms of FIC that you also need to comply with. But in a nutshell, you need to be aware of the AML amendments of all the various acts that came through, and those have been set out in this General Laws Amendment Act. Right. Your clients, if they're accountable institutions, they also need to know about that, because that also includes the anti-money laundering legislation that came in. Okay. So it's very important. And having a nice little summary, I'm a big fan of the summaries. So I'll always say thank you to SAICA for actually compiling this. All right. Now remember FATF, what do? They're an international body, independent, intergovernmental body. They promote any policies and standards for anti-money laundering measures, for combating terrorist financing, and the financing of the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Right, so as we all know, we heard it on the news, FATF grey-listed South Africa and Nigeria for various deficiencies that was basically linked to poor money laundering controls. And that's why we've now got this GLAA. And the legislative changes have been fast-tracked because South Africa wanted to show that they are horrendously committed to addressing the deficiencies that have been highlighted by the FATF so that we can get the grey listing off our name. All right. So the GLAA, the General Laws Amendment Act, also referred to as anti-money laundering and combating terrorist financing. So AML and CFT, or that's the abbreviations that they use there, but it's also fondly regarded as the AML Amendment Act, anti-money laundering legislation. Okay, Anti-Money Laundering Amendment Act. These are huge, huge tools to help us to fight corruption, fraud, and terrorism. Right, so let's look at a quick overview of the publication. There's the front page of it, as you can see, 6 pages long, issued by SAICA in January this year. The contents, we're going to quickly look at FATF, then the GLAA, then the 4 specific acts that contained the majority of the changes to anti-money laundering sections and so on, being the Trust Property Act, the Non-Profit Organisation Act, FICA, and the Companies Act. So let's go and summarize in a nutshell, the GLAA, as you can see, I've put the AML there so that you can draw the link between GLAA means anti-money laundering legislation. So Parliament already signed that. There's been an effective date of 31 December for everything that we have on the slides today. And the rest of the sections will become effective on the 1st of April. And this is not an early April Fool's joke, nor if you're looking at this after the 1st of April, you're watching the video, it's not a belated April Fool's joke either. All right. The Amendment Act proposes changes to the laws, to various laws. The two main ones there, the Companies Act and the Trust Property Control Act. The Companies Act, because that now requires us to go and record all the beneficial owners on the SIPC website with IDs. And the Trust Property Control Act, which makes us possibly accountable institutions. And I think very few of us are actually excluded if you go according to the definitions there. The Trust Property Control Act, this includes the definition of an accountable institution and a beneficial owner. Now, remember, an accountable institution has already been defined in the new FICA, in the amended FICA Act. So it's the same, exactly the same as it is defined in section 1.1, and it also goes according to schedule 1 of FICA. All right, so the accountable institution, which now means that it could be a trust or company service provider. TCSPs are now also included in there. So there's a separate webinar that I did and a separate TSV that I did as well, a technical summary video on FICA changes themselves. And in that one, I go into more detail on the definition of the trust company service provider, but I will show it again to you today. So when we're looking at this, the beneficial owner of a trust, what are we looking at? Beneficial owner. So it's a natural person who directly or indirectly owns the trust property, a natural person who exercises control over the administration. It includes the founder of the trust, or if the founder is a legal person, the person then acting on the partnership's behalf, or the natural person who then ultimately owns or exercises effective control of that legal partnership or that legal person. Every single trustee of the trust, and if the trustee is a legal person, the person who acts on their behalf. So it drills down to the warm body. All right. A natural person who is directly or indirectly ultimately owns or exercises effective control. So it drills down to who ultimately is the beneficial owner. Right. The same way that when we talk about the calculation for the public interest score in terms of the Companies Act. Every beneficiary that is referred to by name in the trust instrument or the founding statement, even where the beneficiaries are nominated on an annual basis. I mean, the beneficial owners there could change on an annual basis as they are nominated. And you would have to then keep this beneficial register, this beneficial ownership register up to date as well. So most of these amendments became effective on the 1st of April, and it's important for trustees to go and familiarize themselves with this Amendment Act, particularly with regard to the new disclosure obligations. What do they need to disclose? The Amendment Act includes disqualification requirements for trustees and also means that that needs to be kept by the masters as well. The masters also need to keep the register containing all the prescribed information, and in such a way that the trustees have to establish and record the beneficial ownership of the trust. They've got to keep a record of the prescribed information, lodge a register of the prescribed information with the master's office, and ensure that that information is kept up to date. It's quite a tall order, especially when the first time that we do this. If you go onto the master's website, there is a link to that. I have done a separate TSV on that topic as well. I think it was sometime in the beginning of April when that TSV is there. So go and have a look at that, where I go into the detail on the document that you access on the master's website. It is a Google Doc right? Google Drive doc that you download an Excel spreadsheet where you then keep all the trustee information, and you've got to keep copies of the ID's documents, but you don't have to upload the ID documents to the master's website. You only have to upload the completed beneficial ownership register. Right. So the master will need to keep that up to date, and the trustee and the master must make the available information to anybody as they ask. And if you don't do that, you are liable on conviction to a fine or imprisonment. Okay. You can go according to the Ministry of Justice and Correctional Services for the public register. There's also a register that the disqualified persons who cannot serve as trustees. Okay. That's got to be in there, as well as the beneficial ownership information. The comments were due, and it's been gazetted now. We know what must be recorded, both for companies, CCs, and for trusts. Okay. NPOs, the changes to the NPO Act says that all NPOs have to comply with the administrative and regulatory framework. They've got to maintain adequate standards of governance, transparency, and accountability. And very important, NPOs will now be required to register with the registrar if they make donations to organizations outside South Africa, or they provide charitable, educational, humanitarian, charitable, educational, or cultural services outside South Africa's borders. If they are not organs of state, they may apply to be registered as well. And the director may also refuse to register an NPO if they haven't complied with the requirements for registration. Right. The NPO Act also says that all registered NPOs must also in writing provide the prescribed information about the office bearers. Right. So the same way that the trustees are going about, the director has to keep the register in the prescribed form. Now, we don't yet know who the supervisory body is here. But the Act also includes information on the disqualification, same as with trustees. Right. So the comments there were due by the 30th of March. I don't think we've had any further development on this. In terms of FICA, I want to just quickly refer you here to the separate CSV I did on SAICA's FICA summary. The major change here is they've changed basically, I call it from a PIP to a PEP. A domestic prominent influential person, they've changed to a politically exposed person. And you can see that the terminology is more in line with our tax laws as well. So a foreign prominent public official is now a foreign PEP. All right. The FIC may also request information from an organ of state, any database, any register that they keep, they can then ask for that. Okay. So FIC basically is this body that just collects all the information. They sit in terms of powers just below the constitution in South Africa. So like almost 2 IC in terms of their clout that they have in South Africa. So there's been various amendments to the sections dealing with customer due diligence. So the know your client sections, ongoing due diligence, and then your foreign PEP people there. Right. The sections here for the FICA in terms of the General Laws Amendment Act, they've amended suspicious and unusual transactions duties, the ones that apply to all businesses. It has in the past and it still does. They've redefined what a beneficial owner is. All right. All the others, they're much of a muchness, still the same there. In terms of the Companies Act, what they've done is they've now included the definitions of an affected company and a beneficial owner. So an affected company is a regulated company and a private company that's controlled by a subsidiary of a regulated company. And even if they're not if they are an affected or not an affected company, on the second slide you'll see if they're not an affected company, they still have to include the beneficial owners. A beneficial owner, who is it? Somebody who directly or indirectly owns the company or exercises the control. Right. So when filing their annual return, companies will also now be required to submit a copy of the securities register and a copy of the register of disclosure of beneficial interest. Now, the register of beneficial interest or the beneficial ownership register on the SIPSI website, there's a little block in the corner down at the bottom where you click on that and you can then go and upload. But for that, you also need to upload the ID documents of the beneficial owners. So that's a little bit more difficult than that. Okay, so the annual return, we know. If a company it does not fall within the meaning of an affected company, they've also got to record the information regarding the natural persons who are beneficial owners. So it still has to happen. SIPSI will keep the register of the information. Yeah, probably at this stage they're going to give us some leeway, but the functionality is already there. Right. So everything is already included in there. The source document that we're looking at there, like I said, the one from SAICA, there is your link to download it. That's the screenshot of the front page. Remember that the GLAA is all about anti-money laundering. The beneficial ownership must be recorded. At the moment, it's for trusts, companies, and CCs, right? Trusts on the master's website, companies and CCs on SIPSI website. And remember that our FICA compliance will be monitored from June 2024, because in terms of the FIC Act amendments, they did say that they'll give us the new accountable institutions will have a transitional period of 18 months to comply. But reporting to FIC remains very, very important. Right. If you feel you still need more detail, remember on my Knowledge is Power slide, there's all the other things that you can go and access. My MCLU webinars, the webinars on demand. You can go and search by recordings or whatever. If you like my webinars, you can go and search for all the webinars that I've got, and you can go and further yourself in such a way. Right, but from my side, ladies and gentlemen, I trust that you enjoyed your little short summary on the GLAA. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.